we'll move on to Gabriella from Ireland. She's going to be giving us an update on what's going on in Ireland.
Just over a month ago on International Women's Day, the government held two referendums. And just to give a quick background, so here in Ireland, we have a constitution that can only be amended by approval of the people by vote. So this is why Ireland has so many referendums. So the most recent high profile ones being marriage equality in 2015 and then abortion in 2018. So these recent referendums were to amend articles on the definition of the family and on the provision of care. And despite all major political parties, including the opposition and the vast majority of NGOs supporting these amendments, both of them failed. So the first one was called the Family Amendment. That planned to change the definition of the family from the marital unit to being founded on, quote, marriage or other durable relationships. And 66.9% of people voted against this one. And then the second one, which I'm going to talk about a bit more, is about the role of women and mothers and care. So for this referendum, the government proposed to delete Article 41.2 of the Constitution, which says, the state recognizes that by her life in the home, woman gives to the state a support without which the common good cannot be achieved. The state therefore shall endeavour to ensure that mothers shall not be obliged by economic necessity to engage in labour to the neglect of her duties in the home. So this article would be replaced with a gender-neutral article recognising the provision of cares by members of a family to one another, and stated that the government would strive to support such provision. So this one was defeated by a massive margin. 73.9% of people voted against this amendment, and this was the biggest failure in a referendum in the history of the state. So just to give a bit of background to the article 41.2, it's always been very controversial. So even before the Constitution's passage in 1937, it was subject to a lot of debate. So like women from like the suffragette movement and feminists at the time argued that it undermined women's right to work, and it said that it equated motherhood with womanhood. And the Republican Congress at the time called it a Stone Age conception of womanhood. And in 1937, there was a campaign by the women's worker unions, graduates and feminists calling for its deletion or amendment from the Constitution. But ultimately, the Constitution was passed by a slim majority, and the article has been part of the Constitution ever since. And then obviously, Ireland was quite a dark place for women for quite a long time. The country was basically a Catholic theocracy. I'm sure most of you already know this, but just to put it into perspective for anyone who doesn't know, divorce was only made legal in Ireland in 1995, and of course abortion was only legalised in 2018. So women having rights is a new thing in Ireland, really, but despite this, we've kind of positioned ourselves as this super liberal place that other countries should look up to and emulate. And this is basically the campaign message that all of the political parties ran for with this referendum. So it was as if this was like the final step for Ireland in shaking off its conservative Catholic past. For example, Fine Gael, who are in government at the moment, they ran ads, like campaign ads for this referendum using like clips, black and white clips of 1950s housewives and like women's rights activists. And the voiceovers were all this like really inspirational voiceovers talking about how the referendum was going to modernize Ireland and make it a more inclusive place. A huge player in the campaign was the National Women's Council. So they're our biggest women's NGO, and they're almost completely government funded, but you know, they're not pro-woman at all. They have a trans-identified man on the board, and in 2020 they were part of an open letter that was signed by a lot of NGOs that demanded that women's rights groups who seek to defend biology, but in quotes, that's what it said. So basically radical feminist and gender critical feminist groups, they signed a letter saying that we should be denied political and media representation. So they're state funded, and they were like they ran the campaign for this referendum basically. And they did a stunt. They all dressed up in period costumes, and they did a historical recreation of a protest that women did against the article in 1937. It was just very embarrassing. There was no real substance to it or any explanation as to how this amendment was going to actually improve women's lives in any tangible way. So yeah, I think this is why the amendment ultimately failed. the government spent 20 million euro on this referendum, and it was like basically nothing more than virtue signaling how progressive we are as a country. Meanwhile, like the country's in bits. Their childcare costs here are the highest in Europe. Like I think it's 1,200 euro a month to keep a child in a creche here in Ireland. And like there's a huge housing and rental crisis. Like something like 70% of 25 to 29-year-olds still live with their parents. The amendment also drew like lots of criticism from disabled people and their carers, because the government's plan was to replace woman and mother with the term carers within a family. Many disabled people and their carers felt that the change would place the burden of caring for disabled on unpaid family members, which I mean it pretty much already is here in Ireland, but they saw that as a step back for their rights because like they're looking for care from the state, and this was just further putting the care in on the family. So there was also the argument that the existing article should be understood in a modern context to help women who need to stay at home. So, for example, there's actually a Supreme Court case. It just started a couple of days ago, and this is going to examine the article for the first time in court. This case, it concerns a woman who is the mother of a disabled adult who needs 24-hour care. And she's not entitled to carers allowance, the full carers allowance, because her husband earns 800 euro a week or something like that. So yes, she's using that article in the Supreme Court at the moment to try and get full carers allowance. So like that, just some of the reasons why people were campaigning, people voted against it. Another thing is that there's been a rise in right-wing anti-immigration sentiment in Ireland, and that's a very recent development in the country. But there are just a lot of people who are angry at everything the government does and just saw this as a total waste of resources it wasn't going to improve anyone's life. So yeah, there was just no appetite for this, and its failure pretty much showed that none of our mainstream political parties understand the electorate at all. Even the opposition parties campaigned for a yes vote. The no campaigns just came from a small but growing pro-life party called AU, the disability rights activists, Catholic organizations, and then some gender critical groups as well. So yeah, then pretty much immediately after they realized the referendum had failed by such a high margin, the very parties who had supported it were like, God damn, we really got this wrong. So within a matter of days, a number of politicians from the government party Fianna Fáil came out and they admitted that they'd actually personally voted no despite canvassing for a yes vote. Like there's one TD, she was photographs of her out on the street with leaflets and stuff like that, canvassing for a yes vote, and then she admitted that she was against it the entire time. And then other Fianna Fáil TDs came out and said that they thought it was time that the country stops playing to the woke gallery. Sinn Féin, which is our largest opposition party, also backtracked on their support of the vote. And most significantly, our Taoiseach, that's the Prime Minister in Ireland, Leo Varadkar, he resigned with immediate effect less than 2 weeks after the results. He claimed it was for personal reasons, and I'm sure personal reasons did play a role, but this referendum was the most disastrous in the history of the state. So, I mean, I am sure that did play a role in his resignation. So for now, he's been replaced with a colleague, but opinion polls are not in Fine Gael's favour anymore, and this government is reaching the end of its tenure anyway. But I mean, hopefully there will be a general election before then. So I guess the question now is if the failure of this referendum will do anything to, halt or delay the other legislation in Ireland that is threatening women's rights. And I think the answer is possibly yes, particularly in the case of the hate speech legislation we have. So for anyone who doesn't know, we have a very extreme hate speech bill, which it's been held up for quite a while in our upper house, the Seanad or the Senate. But it's still in process, but it's a very dangerous bill. It doesn't even define hate. It outlines a very harsh punitive investigation process for those who are accused of hate speech against so-called protected characteristics, which of course will include gender identity. Critics say that the intention of this bill is to create a chilling effect on those who have dissenting opinions, which may cause offence. And it also criminalises the possession of offensive material, such as books or memes, regardless of whether there is an intent to share it or not. And One of the worst things about this bill is that the burden of proof is reversed under this bill. So the onus will be on the accused to prove that they didn't intend to share this hateful material or spread hate. It's essentially legalizing thought crime. And some of the other worrying aspects of this bill are the power given to police and judges. District court judges will be allowed to issue warrants to any Garda for any home or premises where they suspect hate material is being prepared. And the police will also be allowed to demand any password necessary to access phones and computers. And those who refuse to provide the passwords will face 12 months in prison or fines of up to €5,000. So this process is really extreme, open to abuse and used to intimidate and punish people. And so it's just overall, it's a really worrying piece of legislation. And from other countries, we know this will be used to target feminists, women's rights activists, and our material. So we currently have a coalition government of 3 parties here, 2 centre-right parties and the Greens. But the largest party by support base is actually the opposition party, Sinn Féin. And if a general election is called, they are probably likely to win. But again, like the referendum, Sinn Féin supported this hate speech legislation. But in the past 2 weeks, they have come out and called for it to be scrapped, saying that it's badly out, not fit for purpose, and that it's clear it doesn't have support across the political spectrum. And politicians from the government party, Fianna Fáil, have also made similar comments. And another piece of legislation that is very concerning for women's rights at the moment here in Ireland is our health-assisted human reproduction bill. This will cover domestic and international surrogacy in Ireland for the first time, and it's by far the most liberal in Europe, and it's also a global first. Until now, no other country in the world has attempted to regulate the use of surrogacy in foreign countries by its own residents, but this one does, even though it's impossible to regulate surrogacy in jurisdictions that you have no control over. But anyway, the government claims that the bill is ethical and entirely altruistic in nature, and it insists that commercial surrogacy won't be allowed under the law. But like comments from politicians and the bill's wording, it's clear that the bill will just legalize commercial surrogacy by stealth. Under the law, Irish residents will continue to travel abroad for surrogacy. They'll be allowed to apply to travel to any country, provided they show evidence that their surrogacy has no commercial element. And the government claims that this will ensure there's no exploitation happening. But I mean, I think this is ridiculous. Like, the government can't control what happens outside of its own jurisdiction. And as everyone knows, the international surrogacy industry is so corrupt, and they can't guarantee that the surrogate isn't being exploited or that the clinic she's in treats her ethically. The bill will also allow reasonable expenses to be paid to the surrogate. This will include all medical costs, travel, loss of income, clothing, childcare, housework, and all other expenses. Surrogacy lobby groups are also lobbying for the reasonable expenses to include the average wage of the country in which the surrogacy is taking place. So in the case of Ireland, the average wage here is €45,000, which the average woman who's taking part in a surrogacy arrangement does not have access to that type of wage. Like, it's to call this altruistic is just crazy. In the UK, where they already have this altruistic surrogacy is only altruistic surrogacy is legal in the UK. However, they also have this reasonable expenses framework in place in the UK at the moment. But yet the median payment to surrogates in the UK is £14,000, and 10% of surrogates get over £20,000. And usually it's paid monthly to surrogates throughout the pregnancy. It's not expenses. She's being paid. So this law will essentially legalize the trafficking of children across borders, and it says it's okay for newborn babies to be removed from their mothers at birth. And as of now, this bill has widespread support across all major parties. It's been spearheaded by a Fine Gael senator who herself actually had a child by surrogacy in 2015 in India. And this was just 1 year before India actually banned the practice altogether. Ireland has a very, very high rate of international surrogacy. We have the second highest rate of international surrogacy in the world. Surrogacy is very popular here for some reason. And there's zero criticism in Irish media practice, just because I guess so many well-known Irish people and so many wealthy Irish people use surrogates. So I mean, they just don't criticize it. But I'm thinking that maybe with the recent rejection of these referendums, that when the government sort of gets its act together and like the Dáil and the Seanad start working properly again, that perhaps more criticism of surrogacy may start to emerge. Yeah, so that's basically it for Ireland. Kind of a little bit hopeful that maybe things might start changing better. There's going to be a general election in the next year anyway, if there's not if there's one called more sooner. So